In this video tutorial, we'll learn how to synchronize multiple zones on a single display of our BrightSign project to create a full-screen cohesive presentation. We can imagine how impactful it would be to show a video presentation and have the surrounding image zones support our message, or use actions within one zone like navigation buttons to control the state of another zone. So let's see how it's done using BrightAuthor. We'll start with the basic presentation with two zones. One thing to note is that only video and image zones can be linked. It's best to decide on one zone to be the master zone, which will dictate the timing of the entire presentation. Naturally, this is usually best assigned to any zones running video. For the purposes of this example, we'll create a looping linked zones presentation that plays back linked content based on a city such as Washington, D.C. or New York City. First, our playlist will need to be set to interactive for a linked zones presentation. We'll choose Zone 1, the video zone in this example, to be our master zone. Our master zone will need to send out a sync command for other zones to follow. Sync commands can only be attached to events and cannot be attached to the file itself. To create an event before our first video, we'll start with a throwaway image that will time out and then initiate our first video playback. Between this image and the DC video files, we'll include our timeout event and attach our first sync command to that by double-clicking the event and opening up the advanced options. We'll add the link zones command and give the command a unique keyword in the parameter field for the other zones to listen to. In this case, we'll use DC to initiate the Washington, D.C. content. Now we'll simply repeat this process at every point in our master zone that we would like to send a sync command to the other zones in our presentation. To change the content to our New York City theme, we'll add a media end event from the Washington, D.C. video to the New York City video. Double-click on this event and add a linked zones command of NY to initiate the playback of the New York City content. To finish the playlist, we'll add a media end event to the New York video, which will loop back to the Washington, D.C. video and add the DC parameter to the command to close the loop. Now we can move on to our slaved zone. This zone's playlist will also need to be set to interactive. This will allow us to create the listeners for the link zones command from Zone 1, our master zone. We'll start with a throwaway image here as well. Technically, we can just start with the first image as it will simply load up with the presentation as a whole and stay there until it's commanded to do otherwise. But for consistency's sake, let's say we want our first image to show right when our first video starts. For this zone to be capable of hearing the link zones command from Zone 1, the currently active file needs to be listening for that keyword. We'll select the linked zones command here and draw a connection to our first image, which should be a Washington, D.C. image to match our Washington, D.C. video. Then we'll tell this listener exactly what command keyword to listen for by typing that in here. This keyword must be the same as our master keyword to synchronize them, so in this case we'll enter DC. Essentially, we're saying that while this image is active, if the keyword DC is received, advance to the next media file. It's important to note that slave zones can be set to listen for multiple link zone commands to ensure correct playback since our master zone, Zone 1, is sending multiple link zone commands. So if at any point in your presentation there are multiple possibilities of commands that could come from your master zone, such as would be used for user interactivity or navigation, you'll need to make sure that the current file at any time is listening for or set up to respond to all possible commands. To finish up our project, we'll just create the rest of the link zone events that will listen for the NY command from our video zone. With each new video start, a command will now be sent to our secondary zone which will tell the current image to advance to the appropriate image. And we can loop it back to the beginning. Now we can publish our presentation and run it on our BrightSign to see our finished project. We may want to take our presentation a little further and use a playlist in our secondary zone instead of a single image. That's as simple as creating our playlists in the same interactive mode, like this. Now we have playlists that are ready to play in sync with our main zone. However, as mentioned, every file in the playlist will need to be set up to listen for the sync command when it is sent from master zone 1. We'll select each image and use a link zones event to point to the first image of the next playlist. Now, regardless of which file in the rotation is active when our master zone sends the sync command, it will advance to the next playlist. An extension of the linked zones concept would be the ability to create an interactive user navigation interface where one zone's user interactivity triggers the other zone's content playback. For this example, we'll actually make the smaller zone 2 the master zone and have it contain the navigation content that sends the link zone command to the larger slave video zone 1. As we mentioned, commands can only be sent from events between media files, so we'll simply make a duplicate of our navigation image that returns right back to the original with the timeout event. Then we'll use the touch screen event to send the linked zone commands to our main presentation window, which will listen for and respond to those commands. We just need to keep in mind that all files in Zone 1 at any given time need to be programmed to listen for all possible link zone commands used in the navigation. Linking zones will create a full-screen harmonious message and will add another level of sophistication to our presentation. With the concept of the link zones commands and events at our disposal, we'll no doubt think of many creative ways to use our BrightSign zones.